Welcome to the Advanced Shelter Design Series. After choosing your location, there are 3 shelter categories to consider before committing to a design, much less a build. Transitional shelters, which include the quick shelters in the previous series, and debris huts, which will be the start of this series. So we have transitional shelters, which are designed to address an unexpected situation, whether it's you've just landed into a place for the first time, the power has gone out, you broke a leg. We need something that is quick and effective to get you out. The difference between the quick shelters in the previous series and the debris hut, which will start shortly, is that a debris hut sets you up for the next 2 weeks to 2 months, whereas a quick shelter encourages that law of diminishing returns as you deplete your fuel wood and your calories. The second category is seasonal shelters. Seasonal shelters are typically location-based and often seasonally based. So we'll move to the shoreline when the fish start to run, or we'll move to where the berries are. And the materials will often reflect the environment that you're going to be in for that time of year. Bark shelters, thatched huts, wickiups, grass mats. These are all examples of what a seasonal shelter will be. Normally, cold weather shelters, if they're seasonal, are quite small and only for groups that are 3 to 4 persons in size. Trappers, as they move through the landscape into an area. And then again, they're going to move to a different area later on. So seasonal shelters will reflect the materials of the area and the season that they are used. The last in the series will be 4-season shelters. These shelters can be called homes. They'll last for generations if lived in and taken care of. They are designed for at least 6 months, but usually year-round habitation. If the people who are living in them are migratory, like the Sami or the Cree following the reindeer or the woodland caribou, then these shelters, while steady and watertight, are going to reflect a lot of ventilation. They're going to have an open fire plan because they want to dry them out as soon as possible to prevent the rot and the mold. The more solid homes are going to address the severity of winter, but also have ways to ventilate, whether it's removing bark panels from the lower 5 rows so that the longhouse can ventilate, and then button it up again when it gets cold, or the thatch that is rotten at the bottom ring, you just cut loose and redo in the fall when the grass has turned brown. So we have all kinds of modifications inherently built in these shelters, but we also have an assumption of whether or not you're static, living on that same piece of land for long periods of time, which needs to bolster the thermal efficiency, or if you're nomadic. In that case, you can be a little loose with ventilation, in fact you want to be, and a little more generous with the heating because you're going to be gone longer than you're going to deplete the firewood. So the firewood's going to regenerate in your absence. These are just a few concepts as we consider advanced shelter design and the 3 categories: transitional shelters, seasonal shelters, and 4-season shelters. Where would I build my shelter here? It's winter time, there's snow on the ground. All that debris, I can't get to it without burning calories and risking hypothermia. So higher is drier is the norm of technique. We would normally go up a hill, but that's also to take advantage of the beech and the oak. I'm going high up. I'm very mindful of drainage. We have a melt going on. Mud season is upon us. So under this wet snow is wet soil, and we want to get off the ground. So I need materials to lift me off the ground. I'm looking for that deep green screen. You're going to see it fade into a needle leaf forest, and that's where I want to be. Unfortunately, just beyond this tree line is a vernal pool where water has puddled up on a shelf of bedrock underneath and has created a temporary breeding ground for yellow spotted salamanders and wood frog and spring peepers, and the whole water snakes are in there when the frogs are chirping, but it's going to disappear later on. Always that ground's going to be damp and dense, and we're not interested in it for our shelter. Always, except for when we have situations where we need the needle leaf trees to lift us off in a bough bed. Then we're going there for materials, but more often than not, if you can't get up to the top of a hill because it's too exhausting hauling all those materials, build at the highest point of elevation of where your materials exist. You don't want to waste time and calories shuttling. Build close to where your materials are, just as high as you possibly can. The gift of winter is that below freezing, water is not an issue. It's solid. It doesn't soak into your materials because it's solid. Late this time or early in the spring right now, where we have a fresh snow after above freezing days, you've got to modify your shelter building technique and material gathering to fit your need. It's not one size fits all. There's no cookie cutter way to set up a guideline. There's no cookie cutter height. What I'm going to share with you is the great starting point to start your shelter building quest. And only through trial and error and maybe some ripped grommets and a hole in your tarp or three from burning the embers that popped because you gathered pine instead of hardwood, do you learn these things over time. So I'm going to try to get you to great starting points that are the first primary idea in my head that I'm going to set up until the landscape or the weather tells me otherwise. I'm looking for a place that has two trees. There's one here and there's one over here. Far enough apart I could run a ridge line. But my personal preference is that I want those trees to be 1 arm's length longer, no more, than my body laying between them, from my feet to the tree trunk on that side, 1 arm's length, just touching the trunk. If it's closer, great. Not so close that I can't stretch out, but just far enough apart. We don't want that line to be wiggling in the wind or taking on too much torque if we don't need to. It makes it harder to untie all of the bites and the knots that are going to be on, or excuse me, hitches and knots that are going to be on those lines. Plus, wiggling back and forth in the wind cinches those knots. And at night, if you need to move or to readjust your tarp, you may not be able to do so because everything is wiggled in tight. So as close together as you can, with as firm a line as you can, but I'm going to take that spot for a test drive and get my measurements for my bed and box spring. The smaller the footprint, the more efficient and effective the build. Once I've found 2 trees growing just far enough apart to be 1 hand length above my head and down from my feet at the farthest, they can be a little closer. Not so close that you can't tie your hitches and draw your tarp tight enough to get a full spread, but as close as you can without losing the room you need is going to allow you to untie those knots in the morning and to not have to worry about your tarp flapping as much between the 2 trees because the line is too long. Plus, you're using less materials. And if you're making a smaller footprint, the bed doesn't have to be as big. It just needs to be lofty. All of these things, these techniques, lend to a greater efficiency of build. You want to invest as little time and calories for the greatest return. Out of this situation means I have to spend the night. The situation has the potential for death. That's a good motivator, but instead I'm going to make a comfortable night of it and have fun doing it. And that means I got to bust my ass. So now I've set an intention and I can let my mind go as like a Rottweiler that you set loose to sink its teeth and hold onto the outcome you're aiming for, right? So in this space, I found 2 trees. They're just far enough apart that if I laid down, and I'm going to, I wouldn't be able to, I would have a space that's arm length between the bottoms of my feet and one tree, which is this one over here. And then the other tree would be the same distance above my head. Okay, so as I'm looking for my materials, I'm a gardener. I'm not just going to ravage the nearest resources and destroy the landscape. This land has benefited from the way we interact with it, and we've made shelters here for 34 years, and we've got a nice mixed hardwood and needle-leaf forest here that supports bobcat, coyote, gray fox, and red fox, flying squirrels. So we're pretty fortunate because people would come in and learn the skill, and as a result of their shelter building, the forest is healthier. There's a lot of folks who, when they start this craft, they're so eager to share that they don't have that other plug-in, and suddenly there's no firewood for acres and acres in their training area. All right, so I'm looking for the deepest green screen, and you can see it's pretty well thinned out. Good diversity in age range here. Just keep scanning for that deepest green. Right there. That's where I'm going to go to see if I can't find 2 or 3 trees to get our boughs. Here's an example of the trees and how they propagate. Their strategy is to just carpet bomb with seeds and send everybody up all at once, and then the attrition or the die-off is pretty significant. These are fast-growing balsam fir, and they're like the lawn grass of the forest. So much so that we couldn't keep up with all of the shelter building, and there was a lot of die-off. I was hoping to get it down to about 10% die-off, but the competition and the thickness of these trees is just, you can't keep up with them. So they're also a gift in that aspect, is that they regenerate pretty readily, but there's no excuse for not selectively cutting like you would prune a garden for health. These two here, for instance, too close together. They're strangling each other out, and one of them is almost near dead, and that's the one I'm going to prune out. If I prune the near dead one out, what happens is the one next to it doesn't get abraded by the winds every time branches compromise that thin cambium layer, and disease can get in there and hasten the demise of this tree as well. So by pruning, we allow a little bit more wiggle room and growth room for this healthier of the two trees. This one is already losing. This one has a chance if we give it some space. So not only going to get rid of this weaker one, but that one behind it leaning in towards me, that's also going to go, so there's more room. Again, you're pruning the garden, you're making it more biodiverse with better rigor and health, and that increases the wildlife and everything else. I've got these two trees right here. My line is going to run right to this tree, but I don't know the height of it yet until I get my bed made. Now, my bed's going to be right here. If I do have a fire, I might have it on this side, but I'm going to put the line as my reference, this invisible line. I'm not tying it down yet. I'm waiting to get my box spring and my mattress made so that I can determine the height of this ridge line. So I'm going to make my marks for my bed, but I'm going to make sure when I lay down, they're at least an arm length away from the edge of the fire. For safety reasons, the edge of my bed will be at least 1 arm's length. And efficiency reasons. I don't need to get out of bed if all I'm doing is pulling logs into the end of the fire in a big pile at one end of this trench fire or this long fire, right? So it's more effective and efficient that way than to have to keep cutting firewood. Just move those dead standing trees that you've stacked car high through the night one at a time, like you would an incense or a cigarette, slowly burning the ends. So roughly 1 arm's length. This is the part I don't recommend in real life, but in this instructional setting, it's a great condition to get all of your measurements, so I'm going to take advantage of it. And yeah, I'm going to get wet. Here we go. So 1 hand length away from the highest points, my hips, my shoulders, my knees, the top of my head. 1 shark fin. The knees are good reference. Get your bottom of your foot markers, ankles out, bottoms of feet, and now you have a reference for the footprint for your box spring and your bed. Just wide enough that you can roll back and forth with enough leeway, but not so wide that you're going to end up carrying another 800 trips back and forth just to get enough boughs to get you up to where you need to be. There's my imprint. I'm going to trace this line all the way around. Hopefully you can see it in the snow. And now I'm going to start shingling my box spring with evergreen boughs.